Thank you for watching the proposed budget presentation for Edgecomb Eddy School for the 2025-2026 school year, otherwise known as fiscal year 2026. As a brief reminder, the annual budget process begins with the previous year's budget adopted in the spring, continues on into the fall as the school year gets up and running, and then immediately turns to developing a budget for the following year. The budget that you are about to see has been in development since October of 2024. And despite the months that we have spent working on it, there are still a large number of unknowns. We do not know the exact healthcare costs that will be incurred by our staff for next year. That is something that is determined by insurance companies, and we don't have that information yet. We do not know the exact salaries that will take place, although our negotiations team are coming closer to a final solution every day. We do know the exact state subsidy at this time, although we do not always have that information, and it is possible that that could shift if state budgeting processes change. We have an estimated student enrollment for next year, but that does not include students who might be enrolling in pre-K, as that registration has just opened. And most difficult of all, we do not have audited and updated information giving us the current amounts that exist in our reserve accounts and in our unassigned fund. We always like to put some of our budget process in perspective, given our recent enrollment changes. Enrollment at Edgecomb Eddy School has shifted significantly since 2017, when we began encouraging students from Westport and Ulna to attend Edgecomb through an agreement that's been signed with RSU 12. That agreement remains in effect until June of 2028. Edgecomb Eddy School also accepts students through a superintendent's agreements for a variety of different reasons. As of right now, the anticipated enrollment for the next fiscal year and school year is 99 students plus pre-K. If you take a look at the current year's enrollment, you'll see one of the statistics that we are most proud of. We currently have students from surrounding towns in every one of the grades that are housed at Edgecomb Eddy School. Our pre-K through sixth grade classes are all experiencing a broadening of horizons with the enrollment of students from surrounding districts. Keep in mind as we go through this budget process that the Edgecomb budget that you are seeing this evening also includes students in grades 7 through 12 who live in Edgecomb. Despite the fact that they do not attend Edgecomb Eddy School, they are still students of Edgecomb and therefore are our responsibility to educate. In order to understand school funding, you need to understand this diagram. The gray box in the middle is the unassigned fund. Essentially, this is the home for all funds that have been raised or designated for educational purposes. This is a large part of Edgecomb Eddy School's funding. Money enters the unassigned fund through a couple of different ways. It can be placed there through state subsidy. It can enter by means of other towns who are paying for tuition students, or it can be assessed and paid by local taxpayers. Additionally, grant funding, such as federal funds from the Department of Education in the areas of special education through the IDEA Act, and in the areas of title funds through the ESEA Act, enter the Edgecomb Eddy School Fund, but never take part in the regular funding process. We consider those grant funds to be entirely separate from the budget cycle, as they are spent directly on designated items. In order for money to be removed from the unassigned fund, voters have to give permission for that money to be expended. That permission process takes place during the warrant article spring town meeting budget voting referendum. Those warrant articles allow the school board to raise the money through taxes and expend the money through the budget. That budgeting process takes place within 11 cost centers and is designed to pay the bills for the upcoming fiscal year. Any money left over at the end of the upcoming fiscal year is returned to the unassigned fund for consideration in future budget cycles. Additionally, during the annual budgeting process, voters can agree to allow monies to be moved from the unassigned fund into reserve accounts. Reserve accounts are typically used to set aside money by vote for longer-term needs and projects. Items in the reserve accounts can only be spent as needed and underneath established guidelines. Two essential revenue sources for Edgecomb Eddy School are the state subsidy and tuition. State subsidy is money that is sent to Edgecomb by the state It is derived from state taxes, and it is issued to municipalities throughout the state based on a series of complicated funding formulas. You can see through the graph on the left that Edgecomb Eddy's state subsidy rose significantly in 2020, but beginning in 2023 has stabilized at between $400,000 and $470,000. The rise from 2020 to 2022 was the state finally funding the promised 55%. The dip after 2022 occurred because the building was paid off. We were no longer at that time receiving an incoming amount in state subsidy equal to our debt service, but we were also no longer paying out the amount required for debt service. Of even more importance is the graph on the right. One of the elements for which Edgecomb Eddy School and the school board are most proud is the actions that the school and the staff have taken since 2017 to increase the amount of tuition revenue that Edgecomb Eddy School has been receiving from students from surrounding towns. The blue line shows the amount of tuition revenue that has actually been received in school years beginning in 2014 all the way through 2024. The red line shows the anticipated amount of revenue that we anticipated in the current school year and the amount that we are anticipating next year. One of the significant things to understand is that the Edgecomb Eddy School Board has deliberately chosen to underestimate the amount of incoming tuition revenue as we've been budgeting for the last several years. This was done out of an abundance of caution, as those funds do not exist within our unassigned fund until those students are fully registered and have attended at least a significant portion of the year at Edgecomb. However, we feel confident enough in our successes with our tuition students to begin to budget much more accurately for those amounts in the future. We're also very aware of the fact that any additional revenue that may have accrued over the past 2 years is revenue that will exist in the unassigned fund as we move forward into our budgeting process next year for fiscal year 2027. A couple of comments about tuition in general. The regular education tuition amount is typically the maximum allowable tuition as set by the state, the MAT. The MAT, or maximum allowable tuition, is set every year, and it's different at the elementary and secondary levels. It is essential to understand that special education students are also compensated with an additional portion of tuition. That additional special education tuition is based on the amount of specifically designed instruction that those students receive as determined by their IEP. Students who spend less than 50% of their time in specially designed instruction, we receive an additional 20% of the regular education tuition for those students. Students who spend more than 50% of their time in specially designed instruction are provided from their sending town with an additional 40% of the regular education tuition in order to offset some of those costs. Tuition as a result of school choice is incredibly complicated, so we're going to tell a story. We're going to tell a story of Town A, which has a high school, a story of Town B, which has a pre-K through 6th grade school, and a story of Town C, which has no schools within its municipality. We're going to tell a story of 2 students, Johnny and Sally. Johnny lives in Town B, and he attends high school in Town A. His cousin Sally lives in Town C and attends Johnny's old elementary school, School B. All 3 towns have to pay for their resident children to be educated. Town C, where Sally lives, pays tuition to Town B, where Sally is educated. In addition to regular education tuition, Sally also receives some speech services and social work at School B. So Town C compensates Town B for the costs of those services. Meanwhile, Johnny, who resides in Town B, is attending high school in Town A. While he is attending school there, he spends about 30% of his time receiving specially designed instruction to help him with his learning disability. So Town B pays Town A an additional 40% of his regular education tuition to cover that cost. Town A is receiving that tuition from Town B for Johnny, and in return is paying for all of the high school programming. In addition to tuition, the home towns are responsible for ensuring that transportation and other resources are available to students who reside within their borders. As the Edgecomb School Board designs a budget for fiscal year 2026, we have a couple of numbers that we do know and a couple of numbers that we don't know. We are fairly confident that the state subsidy that Edgecomb will receive this year is $468,099. We are estimating an incoming tuition revenue of $450,000 from our sending towns. We recognize that that tuition estimate is still low given the number of students that we hope to have remaining with us at Edgecomb Eddy School next year. But again, as stated previously, it is the board's feeling that it is better to err on the side of caution, knowing that any additionally accrued revenue will be available in future years to offset future expenses. One of the other frustrating pieces is that right now, Edgecomb, along with many other municipalities and schools around the state, are waiting for the past several years of audits. Audit paperwork for schools and municipalities is an end of the year cycle that allows for an outside auditing firm to verify all expenses and recipient revenues and ensure that the municipality or school district is starting off the next year with the most accurate understanding of the money that is available to them. Unfortunately, in the absence of 2 years of audits, as well as the fact that during those 2 years, Edgecomb Eddy School, as well as AOS 98 in its entirety, transitioned from an external auditing and accounting firm to an internal director of finance position. We do not feel confident in moving forward with this year's budget with any estimated amount of funding in our unassigned fund. We also do not have a clear knowledge of what is available in our capital reserve fund. We have been advised by our accountants to avoid making decisions for the future based on numbers that we do not have definitively. The good news, we hope, is that this means that as we move forward next year with fiscal year 27, we should have a significant amount of revenue that has been accruing that will exist within the unassigned fund. And that should be able to do what the voters have indicated a desire for over the last 2 years, which is to replenish the amount in the capital reserve and in the student expense account, as well as allow for funds to be remaining in the unassigned fund as we move into the next budget cycle. When schools budget, all of their expenditures are placed within 11 different cost centers. These are state mandated accounting terms for the different ways in which and categories in which money might be spent. Category 1 or cost center 1 is for regular instruction. This is all general education teachers, ed techs, substitutes, salaries, benefits, instructional supplies, professional development. That cost for the fiscal year 26 is up 2.5% for a total of about $53,000. That is predominantly due to increases in salaries. Cost center number 2 is special education. Special education for fiscal year 26 is up 15.9% or $116,000. This covers a couple of things. It covers all of our local special education teachers and ed tech salaries and benefits. This line is also the place where the AOS budget portion for special services is allotted out to each member of the AOS. We pay our AOS allotment through this line in Cost Center 2. Cost Center 2 also covers classroom and program materials, as well as programs such as speech pathology, psychological evaluations, PT and OT for students in-house, as well as providing any tuition and fees necessary for students who have been given out-of-district placements through an IEP process. Cost Center 3 is career and technical education. There are Edgecomb students who are receiving access to vocational instructional programs, but that programming occurs at the secondary level, and so the costs for those take place within the tuition that we are sending for those students to be educated at other secondary schools. Cost Center 4 is other instruction. This is co-curricular, extracurricular, and summer school programs. For us, this is also the home for the Chewonki Outdoor Encampment Program opportunity for 6th grade. And while it is up 23.3% for fiscal year 26, that 23.3% is a whopping $700 and reflects the fact that next year's 6th grade is a little bit bigger than this year's. Cost center number 5 is student and staff support. This is up 10.6%, which again is about $12,000. This is how we provide access to guidance counselors, social workers, as well as the nurses' salary and benefits. This line is also the area in which you will see student testing necessities, computer software, and hardware. One element to note as we discuss the social worker, Edgecomb Eddy pays for a full-time social worker, but that social worker spends 3 days a week at Edgecomb Eddy and the other 2 days a week at Georgetown Central School. Therefore, Edgecomb Eddy School receives a payment equivalent to 2 of the 5 days a week salary for that social worker in additional revenue lines from Georgetown Central School. Cost Center 6 is system administration. This represents Edgecomb's portion of the AOS budget, including central office business, legal fees, etc. This is a line item that went down in the previous fiscal year due mostly to the use of reserve funds that had been set aside. It is, however, showing a fairly significant increase this year. This line item is up 26.1% for a total of $32,000. The reason for this is because the AOS board, of which the Edgecomb board is a part, made a fairly significant decision in the cost sharing mechanism for technology. The CSD, or the Boothbay Harbor Schools, have always had a director of technology position, and the smaller schools have offered that school district, the CSD, a stipend to periodically access the director of technology's skills. However, over the past several years, we've come to realize that that director of technology position is spending the vast majority of their time doing work that is applicable on an AOS-wide level that is predominantly network maintenance, software maintenance, and testing. Therefore, we decided as an AOS board that it was most appropriate to pay that position as an AOS-wide position. This year is year one of a 2-year process as we move the entire cost of that position from the CSD over into the AOS. Cost Center 7 is school administration. This is our local building principal and administrative assistant salary and benefits. This also includes all of the other technology needs that our front office requires. Cost Center 8 is transportation and buses. This is up 21.6% for about $90,000. This is predominantly due to a decision that's been made in special education transportation. We have made the choice to go ahead and purchase a van as well as budget for availability to pay a driver to transport a student to a specialized instructional facility next year. This is the most economical as well as efficient way of doing something that is mandated by a student's IEP. Cost Center 9 covers facilities maintenance. This is up 23.4% or $65,000. This is predominantly due to custodial staff salaries and benefits, as well as updating and restocking most of our cleaning and repair supplies within the buildings, and setting aside costs to be able to address some minor and short-term building and grounds requests. We are making the decision to purchase a small exterior waterproof shed to increase the amount of external storage that we have. This is one of the significant choices that we've made to go ahead and do in an effort to empty that material out of the gym locker rooms where it is currently being stored. The long-term hope is that having those locker rooms more accessible to the public will increase the desirability of the gym and locker room space as a rental location. Please note that this facilities and maintenance line does not include any funds that are set aside for paving the driveway, which is something that is seriously going to need to be considered in the next year or two. Cost Center 10 is debt service. This is where we would be repaying any loans for school construction or bus purchase. We have none at this time. Cost Center 11, the final cost center, is all other expenditures. This is up 40%, which represents about $10,000. For Edgecomb Eddy, this is entirely about the cost of our school lunch program. As of this time, Edgecomb Eddy brings food in from the CSD Food Services Program. The change in this cost is reflecting the increased actual costs of those services from the CSD. We sign a contract for these services every year. Every year, one of the decisions that the school board tries to make is to look at when it would become most efficient to bring our food services costs and staff in-house. And at this time, we have made the decision not to make that change for the upcoming year as a cost-saving measure. In summary, the expenditures for fiscal year 26 are up 10.6%. That's an increase of $398,000. Special education needs represent much of this increase. However, these special education increases meet next year's anticipated needs with the long-term goal of replenishing the student reserve account. The other additional choice represented in these expenditures is to budget to include the external shed. With regards to funding sources, we do not feel comfortable moving forward with offsetting costs with money out of the unassigned fund at this time. In previous years, we have been able to offer that offset of between $150,000 to upwards of almost $500,000 in past years. However, with the increase in anticipated tuition revenue, the overall increase in assessment to the town of Edgecomb is only 2.7%. This is a total increase of approximately $85,000. The long-term goal of the school board continues to be to stabilize these annual changes. We do want to recommend that once again, we have an anticipated immediate need that is unaddressed in that budget, and that is to pave the driveway. At this time, we like to take a few moments and put some of our recent history in perspective. So if we look back over more than the past 5 years, we will see an increase in total expenditures from 2017 to 2026. We also stop to recognize that those increases show a decreasing percentage of town taxes that are being paid that are going towards education. One of the aspects of this, of which the Edgecomb School Board is most proud, is this dip that you see in the years 2021 and 2022. Those were 2 years where the school board was able to offer the use of significant funds in the unassigned fund balance to offset assessment to the town. That was at the request of the Budget Committee and the Select Board during the peak economic struggle of the COVID pandemic, and we are incredibly proud to have been able to do so. Finally, some historical perspective on the amount of tax burden that is assessed to the citizens of Edgecomb. Again, looking back from the year 2015 to the year 2025, you see an increase in assessment totals that stays under an annual cost of living increase of 4%. This is not to imply that that 4% cost of living is significant in any way, simply that it is one measure of the increases that have been occurring throughout the economy over the past decade. Again, a reminder that this significant dip in assessment costs to the town during the years 2021 and 2022 came because the school board was able to offer the use of funds otherwise designated for public education to instead be used to offset the tax burden on the citizens of Edgecomb Eddy School. This diminishment in assessment is one of the reasons that the past 2 years of assessment increases have seemed so shocking. Had they stayed on a more consistent keel rather than showing that offset in the years 2021 and 2022, I anticipate that we might be having very different conversations at this time. Finally, some key topics for discussion. We are continuing to await updated audit information. Our capital reserve fund includes perhaps $40,000. Our student reserve fund is at 0, and our unassigned fund is awaiting the same audit data. We would like to consider an additional warrant article to replenish the capital reserve account up to a total of $150,000, and an addition warrant article to replenish the student reserve account up to a total of $150,000. We also ask the town committees to consider an additional warrant article to address paving the driveway, either in this year's budget or the following year's budget. Additionally, some important information for voters. The school board, select board, and budget committee have spent a great deal of time discussing a proposal to add a budget validation referendum. This spring, voters should consider adopting a 2-part school budget process. In addition to what we do now, which is to adopt the school budget in an open town meeting style setting, a budget validation referendum would add a second vote by referendum that would have to occur before adopting the final budget. Topics for long-term consideration continue to be when and if we wish to bring our kitchen staff in-house, how the facility of the school could be and should be used as an emergency shelter or a warming facility, and the addition of the external shed. Finally, some important dates to remember. The town vote will take place on Saturday, May 17th. School budget voting will occur at 10 a.m. that morning in an open meeting. Town referendum voting, to include voting for individuals running for local office, will occur by paper referendum ballot that afternoon from 1 to 7 p.m. The Edgecombe Select Board and School Board will be jointly presenting information about the warrant articles on Saturday, April 12th at 10 a.m., as well as on Wednesday, May 14th at 6 p.m. In the event that you have more questions, please consider contacting district administrators or school board members. And my school email is visible on the screen, as is Superintendent Kaler's. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this and for caring enough to try to understand the process of budgeting for public education. Your time is appreciated.